Hello, everybody. You
Okay.
can hear all okay?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I hope you're able to enjoy some of that time of being mindful of your presence with one another and in this space and to get to be familiar with one another. I'd like to, first of all, begin this part of our time acknowledging the First Nations peoples, the Wurundjeri people, who have looked after this land from time immemorial, and we commit ourselves to working with them towards reconciliation and healing. And so we would like to acknowledge their elders past and present and work with their elders in the future as well. So we come, and I'd like to uh, welcome to our group also Eva Orr. Hello, Eva. Eva's from the Uniting organisation, our Uniting agency, and she's the Reconciliation Action Plan worker. Yes, lead worker, is it? Lead. Ah, that's how we call it. Now, Eva, tell us a bit about yourself, would you?
Okay. Thank you very much for that. I also like to honour the Wurundjeri people of these lands, pay my respects to the elders past and present on these lands. I'm not from these lands. I'm from South Australia and Nunga, so part Nunga and part Irish. So, and I like to honour both aspects of that because it took both to create me. So, I'm the reconciliation lead for Victoria, Tasmania, and my role there has been to roll out reconciliation across all the uniting offices in Victoria and Tasmania. So I do a fair bit of travelling, talking to people, looking at how we make uniting much more culturally safe. As we know, throughout history and through some poor policies, as we know throughout history, um, we know throughout history and through poor policies in the past has created much trauma for First Nations people. And I use the word First Nations because at Uniting we have a lot of, well, we don't have a lot of First Nations people working, but the ones we do have, we come from everywhere. And so we felt it was, and part of Reconciliation Australia also uses the terminology First Nations. That's also to bring us in alignment with our First Nations brothers and sisters across the world as well. So, so within that, like I said, my role is to roll out what is called at the moment an Innovate Wrap, which is embedded into the Uniting framework, and make sure we bring those policies and everything to life. So I work on policy, write policy, and building relationships between communities and other uniting officers, and just trying to bring more First Nations people into the organisation. So one area next year, I'm definitely looking at more recruitment in this area because we know what makes people feel safe, and that's having people there that they can identify with. So that's my role at Uniting.
That sounds a very interesting role as you'd meet lots of different people. Before I go into that a bit more, tell us a bit about Eva. You've told us that you're a Noongar woman, and now you were telling me before about a personal matter. Is that okay to share with us? You've got a daughter
Yep.
who lives in South Australia, but she had an accident today, didn't she?
She had an accident on Friday,
On
actually.
Friday.
So that was one of the things. First two questions, well, second and third question. One thing to be grateful about. Well, the thing was, I was really grateful that she's okay.
Yeah.
I was on the phone to her. My daughter's a proud Aboriginal woman as well. She's an Aboriginal educator in high schools over in South Australia. And she was on the phone to me Friday, and all of a sudden I heard a strange noise, and the phone went blank. And because in her car she's got one of those new ones that people can talk to you while they're driving. So it went blank, and I sat there thinking, "Oh, I hope you haven't been in an accident." Next minute, she rings me back. I've just had an accident.
Oh,
So she wrote a car off.
oh,
Um, and all she ended up was with a bruise, which I was very grateful for, I have to say. So, yeah, so out of all of that, being stressed as a parent, you can well imagine here I am going, here I am, I can't even get to you in a hurry. But I was very grateful that she's got some good, really good friends over there. Um, and one of them happened to be not far from where the accident was, and this friend of hers is a paramedic. So I got there, assisted her, and has been taking care of her since. So for me, that's a real blessing. Yeah, I feel like it's a real blessing because if she had been in a different car or an older car, she would have been severely injured. And I remember at the beginning of the year when she got this car, she went, "Oh, it's too fancy," and this, that, and the other, but it certainly saved her this time. So I'm so grateful that that has happened. Um, as for me, I've been in Victoria 20 something years now. Came across from South Australia just for a holiday and ended up staying. So I never got back home and still struggle to get back home. And it's because of my work. Basically, where I work, Uniting's a great place to work for. Wonderful team. I sit in the mission and equity team within Uniting, and just the values. It's definitely one of the best places I've ever worked. So,
Tell me, one of the things you were saying about the team, and you've spoken very positively about working with Uniting, what's some of the exciting things? And then we'll come to what are some of the challenges you face?
the exciting things within the team and the real positive about it is we are a team. We're a really good, close knit team, so we're there to support each other constantly through different areas. Our positions are very varied within the team. We have 3 reverends that sit on our team as well, and my colleague Kate runs the GLBTIQ plus throughout Uniting. Bryn does consumerisms. We've got the Heritage Trust that look at old records where people come together who were in orphanages and that, wanting to find their records. But we support each other really, really well. If someone needs a hand with something, you're supported. And I have to say, my team leader, my boss, is a very good boss. And I'll say his name. John Clark.
She has to say that because she knows I'm friends
Mr.
with.
John Clark is brilliant as a boss.
And she's probably going to check up on you by looking at the video later.
Yeah. Make sure I turned up. No, yeah. And the corporate end of Uniting are so passionate about the work they do. They're passionate about getting things done right on the ground. How do we do it better? Because at Uniting it's about our consumers. It's about people who want to attend. And within that we want to make it safe for everybody, every group that comes along. So
Because that ties in a lot with the church over the years has had its ups and downs with struggles. And what I picked up from what you're saying is in Uniting, they've owned those struggles and said we have to keep on doing something about it. So the way it works with LGBTQI plus people, with Indigenous people, with people who are marginalised, and they're passionate to make sure that when they're working together with such people, that they're not feeling further alienated.
Absolutely. And a part of that is, and I know for a fact we have 3,444 employees because I've just done a report for reconciliation. So every single employee will have an induction into either unconscious biasness, looking at your unconscious biasness, those sorts of things. They're looking at history and around First Nations people and why our community is where it is at this stage. At the moment, I believe community is going through some sort of transformation on some levels as well. Part of that too, Uniting does brilliantly, is with our kindergartens. We have reconciliation within every single kindergarten, and these children speak language better than I do. And I forgot, you sort of, you don't use it for a long time, you forget certain words. Now, these children that are coming up now, I believe in another 20 years we won't need to do reconciliation because it will happen automatically. So, but like I said, that's something that's been done really, really well. The other thing is too, people are trained, people are, and if you've got any questions, you can always come and ask somebody. At the moment, like I said, there's a shift. I find there's a shift in community. So, and I've been talking to younger mob, and younger mob don't see an issue as much as what the older mobs do. So, with Uniting, I also have another role I work in 2 days a week. So I teach at Federation University, and I work with mob teaching social work. Now, I had some year 12s come in, mob First Nations kids come and have a look through uni a couple of weeks ago. And I spoke to them about if they could have a voice, what would it look like? They want equality for all people. They don't see there's a difference anymore. They said we're being educated. We've got good homes, and I think this is generation coming up is where we close the gap in lots of areas. So I have a lot of hope for the future. Some of the issues we have, however, is working with Uniting with Mob is they still have an issue with it being a part of the church because, and this is mainly the older generations. And that's because of what happened with the missions and everything else. So on those levels, there's still a lot of work to be done. Try to now because I sit on Uniting Care Australia as well, and we look at advocacy Australia-wide for First Nations people and things like that. But we also look at how we bring First Nations people along with the church as well now, and try and get out there. And I know a big part of my role is talking about the church and how it's changed. And I try to give them really good examples on how it's changed and invite people, but there's still this hesitancy. I myself was fortunate enough to grow up within the church, but also to grow up learning ritual and learning about the difference, but the similarities within it all, So within that, it's I can relate things back on how the earth, being the church for First Nations people, basically, because it is. This is spirit here. This is God here. This is everything. We're connected to absolutely everything, and that's the way it's always been for First Nations people. Nothing's separate. And that's what we found over the years. When you look at some of the Western ideologies, especially around backburning and things like that, it's like, but if you don't do that, it has an impact over here. Those sorts of things manage the land for over 60,000 years, and these things need to be done, and it's that recognition that everything is absolutely connected. So that's what the spirit work.
So, as a church who wants to work and who we commit to regularly towards reconciliation, what is it that we can do to heal some of those bridges and those gaps that exist?
Yeah, so what I would do is get involved in reconciliation events, NAIDOC week events, reconciliation events. One, because you go out and you offer assistance, it's like volunteering, you go and do the work, build those relationships. Once you build those relationships, people will feel more comfortable coming. I know in Geelong that the Queenscliff Church there has a really good relationship with the First Nations people down there and reconciliation and those sorts of things. And they'll often come and do certain events at the church there. So it's about building it up. It's about letting people know who you are in lots of ways. And that's very much what I said about my own work, is going out there and saying, yes, um, we are part of the church, and you can't deny it, you know. So it's looking at how you build those together to create something that's really solid for First Nations people.
So take some initiative to get alongside, to get involved. Some of our people have been doing that for a long time. They've built wonderful rapport and relationships. But one of the struggles, of course, is that we've talked about is there are differences within First Nations people. Like you mentioned, young people compared to older people. But when we were talking the other day, you mentioned that the issues faced by Central Australian First Nations people is very different to Queenslanders, which is very different to here in Victoria. So, so with all of those things, what differences do you notice between the different nations, and also how can we work together in such difference?
yeah, and that's it. It's about recognizing where the differences are and being able to respect that. You know, I know for myself coming to Victoria and going, wow, wow, they're so different from South Australia in a lot of ways. Um, and for me, it was very much more about, I found in Victoria a lot more angrier about what's happened in the past. And so that comes out a lot more. Whereas in South Australia, we've had a little bit of a different influence as well. So, yeah, it's hard to explain really. But yeah, the Northern Territory, unfortunately, really, I wished our governments, and that's part of it, advocating. You know, Northern Territory government is absolutely shocking when it comes to First Nations people. Absolutely shocking, and it's disgusting what happens up there. And the poverty is incredible. But the different way of life too. You further you get out bush, the more traditional things we become. You know, back to the old point, you still have some law, LORE, happening there. You upset somebody in the tribe, you will get speared. So, so you've still got that happening down there, and some of the old traditions, moving into manhood or womanhood ceremonies, those sorts of things. So they're still very, very, very got a lot of the old cultures and a lot of the old language. Whereas you move around to the cities, and a lot of First Nations people have been brought up in the cities, and some of the culture's been lost, and some of the language has been lost, and some of the way of doing things has been lost. And so, depending where you are, and it's just a different attitude. Like when I head up to Queensland with a lot of the Murrays that I've come across, they're all Christian based. So they have a different way of viewing their culture and Christianity together. So whereas yeah, it really is, and it can be really tricky, and it's very much about being respectful where you are, where you live, to the mob that you live near, basically, because there'll be changes. Where I go across the state, and I know that there's different ways to address people, and I have to do it differently, because for instance, in Gippsland, you got Gunai land. Now, some places will accept that, but then I got a letter from Gunai saying, no, we're separate, and if you work with Kurnai, we can't work with you. So, these are some of the things that are still happening, unfortunately, amongst the families out there. But it's the same thing that's coming up now with the Uluru Statement of the Heart. I know for Uniting Care Australia, we're advocating for it. And we've been looking at all sides of the statement, going how this is going to work. But meeting up in Brisbane just recently, and we had South Australian mob and all them up there, and they're saying we don't want it. Why don't you want it? Because we want to make sure it's not another Etsy. you know. So, and South Australia mob have this new terminology now that I have to say that's people are going, wow, I've never heard that before. Well, we don't want corporate blacks sitting at the table. We want community members sitting at the table. So, unfortunately, it's starting to create a bit of a division. I'm hoping that it will, people will become educated enough to be able to look at it for what it really is and how it's going to enhance and it's how it's going to create voice. Because in some areas of this country, there's certainly still no voice being heard. So, you know, I know for myself, I've just pulled down 500 pages to read up on the intent of it all, so we can look at where it's really going to sit and what it's really going to do. Had a meeting with Linda Burney just recently, who said that basically it was going to be you can talk to mob, but we don't have to take on board what they have to say. So this is all the stuff. There's a lot of misinformation going out there as well at the moment. So, but yeah, it can be quite divisive depending on where you are and which group you're working in. So once again, it's all about respect.
So that comes back to the question of, it's not just the question of dealing with First Nations people, it's how we deal with anybody, isn't it? To be respectful of one another and to consider the needs and the background. And that's why we began our time together here by talking about what are our concerns, what are our good things we had, and touching base and getting to know each other a bit better, because we can't build that respect if we don't listen and understand each other. So that's to do with First Nations connections, with people, LGBTQI people, people of just different cultures, whether they're from Anglo or from Asian cultures, or from born here or born overseas, or first, second, third, fourth or generation, all those sort of income levels, all those things affect the way we see the world and so on. So in the midst of all this, tell us a bit about your spirituality and how that connects with your work and what you're doing. How does that fit in? Tell us a bit about that, your spirituality.
Well,
this is a personal question.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? So my spirituality is very varied. Grew up in the church, which was New Apostolic in South Australia. Very fortunate there, including my minister back then got us to look at every single doctrine from all lots of different places so we could get a better understanding of, so read the Quran, those sorts of things back then. And I have to say there was conflict with that when I started looking at my First Nations stuff. And it was very much, well, how do I incorporate both, So then I went and learnt more about earthwork from, ceremony from some of the elders. So within that itself, I was able to piece them both together and go, basically, and I think it's from one text in the Bible really, that where Christ talks about being everywhere and everything, and when you look at it, and it's very much First Nation stuff as well, and it's all of them. I've had the pleasure over the years. I used to belong to a group over 30 years ago that was called Spiritual Unity of the Tribes. And what we did was we brought out elders all around the world from different tribes, from First Nations tribes, and we learnt from them as well. So within that, was able to look at the connection of everything. So so I probably sit within it all, and respect it all, in the sense that we're all connected, we're all one people at the end of the day, and it's how we walk upon the earth that's important. It's important it's that respect for all cultures, all people. And I know they can get tricky at times.
So how does that infuse you, or your spirituality inspire or encourage or strengthen you? Give you energy. How does it give you energy?
Okay, my spiritual, what works for me with spirituality, my spirit, is because I think without that, and there's one thing I often contemplate is hope. If you haven't got that, where's your hope come from? You know, and I find spirit has always been about hope for me. Especially, and I was talking to someone else about it at work this week, and I said it's amazing how many people, all of a sudden, when there's an absolute crisis in their life, all of a sudden will turn to God or turn to something, and may never had anything in their life before. And that's like because we hope there's something. So for me, it's always been about hope, but it's also about having uh, being connected to everything. If that makes sense. Like the earth herself will provide for me and look after me and keep me sheltered, keep me warm, keep me fed. So it's about having gratitude as well. So hope and gratitude, I think, are the two things in that aspect. And it was interesting coming to work for Uniting because you also, part of it is a lot of people still out there going, Christianity. It's the first place I've been where I'm able to say, yes, I do believe in this. And I can be who of all I am, within all of that. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing so much today. welcome back. Has anybody got any questions that they wanted to ask Eva? You know, Trevor's going to catch you later, Eva. Trevor's the one who's one of our cooks with the other. He's later there. He's got a personal question, which is not so much for the group, so there's that one. Now, I know in this group, they were asking you questions before. Were there questions from that group that you would like to feel it would be good for everybody to refer to this?
We talked about a lot of different things actually in the group. I think part of it is recognising that there is change, which is good. It's coming with our young people and young mobs. So I have a lot of faith. In 20 years, won't need my role or any of those things. So that's what I'm hoping for. You know, when I look at it, they're all learning mindfulness in school now. So they're all learning how to become mindful. But kindergartens and that, they're all learning language. You know, and how to get back and learn some of the mythology too.
Which languages was the question? Which languages you're learning? Because there are so many.
Yeah, so and it's been interesting so far. I noticed when I was in Hobart a couple of weeks back at Kinney, they're obviously learning Koori, which is interesting compared to Powellahs over there who might want some of that as well, but there seems to be more Koori written books and language out there than there is others at the moment. So yeah, so there are lots of different. But if you go to the Northern Territory, completely different. Absolutely different.
But isn't it respectful to where you are to learn a little bit about the culture, but a way to get into the culture is to learn a bit of language as well?
No, absolutely. To learn a bit of language, and they're all different. Even across Victoria, you'll have different places and different language for different places. I know, the main one here for welcome is Wamajika, whereas in Horsham, that's not the case. And I can't remember what that one is off the top of my head right now.
Did you all hear that? Wamajika? Wamajika?
Wamajika. Yeah, it means welcome.
Welcome. Wamajika.
So, so basically, like I said, you go to Horsham and it's a different dialect again. Go to Tasmania and it's completely different altogether from one end of the island to the other end of the island. So, a big part of it, when working with Bob or walking with Bob is to look at who you're walking with and be respectful.
In a sense, it's a bit like the parallels of different parts of Europe, isn't there? Because you've got different locations in Europe. We're used to it. We forget the second peoples came to the continent of Australia thinking, they're all black, so therefore they're all the same. But they're not. Everybody's different. They've got their own nationality. They've got their own language, their own culture, their own stories to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing coming to Victoria that I learned too was, because there was this ideology out there that very, First Nation people are transient. Well, I learned that down in Portland and that they actually had their own huts. They weren't transient at all down that way. So, and all the different languages. There were so many different languages. Having to pay your respects to get onto different parts of the land as well. I know that in the Northern Territory up that way there, if you're one clan, you're certainly not allowed to go onto certain lands because you're the wrong sort. So, there's a lot of different, it's like all, I'd say. There's just a lot of different languages, different cultures within that. Even though they have similar mythology, you still find there's different ways of doing ceremonies. So, yeah.
So, any other questions from any of the other groups?
Well, you can't sort that out for the listen.
Your daughter's name?
My daughter's name is Nicole.
Oh, Nicole.
Yes.
Sorry, Christine?
If you can't work it out with different lands and different languages, How are we going to work it out with all of this?
Well, do what I do, and
Exactly.
yeah, look, just be respectful. You
I'll do my
know,
best.
go and introduce yourself. Like, you know, when I'm talking to Mob and that here, I'm always respectful. This is not my land. You know, and that's where I start with. And being open to listening. You know, a big part of reconciliation is the truth, and deep listening. You know, other people have different truths. I know our truths in South Australia were different compared to here because we were settled differently and stuff. So, you know, we didn't have some of the stuff that well and truly happened here in Victoria, Tasmania. We did have some, but not as much as what Victoria and Tasmania certainly got. And once again, with South Australia, was so,
And that's the thing. Often when we hear different stories, we start. It's easy if we don't want to pay attention to just be dismissive. Whereas the reality is that invites us more to listen deeply, and spend time to listen more deeply to what the story.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it is about listening. It's a trauma behind, you know, policies that were already, you know, 60 years ago or whatever. It's still playing out. You know, I know growing up in the 60s and 70s, the way things were then compared to what they are now is completely different. Completely different.
Yeah.
So, and just attitudes as well have changed a lot. You know, so yeah, which is a good thing. Which is a good thing. There has been a real shift, and hopefully they keep shifting.
Well, this group, was there any other questions? Alec?
In what ways, either in your group, what you're doing, being communicated to the congregation?
In what ways is the things that you're doing being communicated to the congregations in the church?
Now that's a really good question. Yeah, it's basically if the church asks, to be honest. Like I said, I have some great ministers in my team. And they'll talk about reconciliation. Sometimes some of the members will come into Uniting and that, and I'll talk to them. So, yeah, basically if I'm asked, then I'm happy to step out.
You'll have an opportunity to use cross.
And the question there was, do you have an opportunity to use crossword?
No, but I do like reading. So it's a great magazine. But yeah, no, we don't actually.
Can I just say that acknowledgement of country is occurring in churches now, and it's recent. The change is relatively recent, like in the last 5 years. So it's getting through somehow.
So for the video, acknowledgement of country is being a fairly recent addition to what's being done in churches, and that's a step forward for the churches, is what was being said. So, with what Alex is raising too, is there steps that we could take in a broader scope that can help to bring connections? Because your role is predominantly working in Uniting, not so much the wider churches. Although there is that group you're with is part of the connection between the church and Uniting as agents. Steps for us is locally getting to know local groups. There's the Mullam community locally, and there's Eleanor. There's other groups locally as well, isn't there? Yeah. If you open your eyes and Google it, you'll find somewhere which is fairly local as well. So, yes. Any other questions? Can I then say thank you to Eva and Helen? Eva has travelled up from Frankston to be here today, and I must confess I've gained. There's a story going around that's near Frankston's a pretty rough joint. But since I've been over here, Helen and I have gone down and we snorkel under the pier at Frankston or go out for lunch on a day off or things like that. And we've discovered that Frankston's a lovely place. And thank you for joining us from your delightful area of God's country in Frankston. And we want to say thank you with, first of all, a flower, a plant, which hopefully will stay with you for a while. And I'm sure there's something in there that won't stay very long. Chocolates. They will do their time in appropriate time. And so thank you for being with us. And please relax, everybody. And the blessings of God and God's grace be with you all. And thank you for everybody who's helped out with today. Blessings and God's grace go with you all.
And I'd like to thank you all for having me too. It's been wonderful to come. And as for the church too, just getting back to that question, a lot of spaces out there doing really great stuff that I've seen over the years. One of my closest friends in Adelaide is a minister, a reverend as well, and some of the work's coming out of there is brilliant as well. So I'm very impressed with the way the church is going, and I'm still trying to work out how we get more people involved. So hopefully we'll be able to reconcile and bring them all in. So thank you.
God's blessing. Go with God.